We haven't got it. It's not there. Oh, we did. Huh?
Sing it, Nick. You know you
Bom
can.
bom bom ba-dum bom 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 ba-dum ba-dum bom ba-bom ba-bom. That one, which is the signature tune of the European Broadcasting Union, under whose auspices the Eurovision Song Contest stands. And I'm very pleased to say that we have our honoured guest here, Jon Ole Sand, who's the executive supervisor of the Eurovision Song Contest, and he's the man you see every year who appears in front of millions of people and introduces some new regulation or procedure or new country that he's brought in his never-ending quest for absolute perfect democracy in his institution and what it does.
My name is Catherine Baker. I've been watching Eurovision since 1994 and researching Eurovision since the mid-2000s. The reason for that is it ties into one of my big research interests, which is narratives of national identity, the kinds of stories people tell each other about what a nation's like and what its past has been, then how people use popular culture and popular music to retell those stories and argue over them and reimagine them. Now, I started my academic career by researching how popular music in Croatia changed during and after the Yugoslav wars in the 1990s. And I sometimes say I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't seen Croatia showcasing itself through popular music at Eurovision in the 90s, because where else as an English speaker who didn't come from the Yugoslav region would I have been likely ever to have heard it then? Now, Eurovision interests probably dozens, if not a couple of hundred now, researchers who are interested in national identity or European belonging. And the reason for that is it gives large and small countries a platform once a year for quite literally performing an interpretation of their national identity and an interpretation of their relationship to Europe. Now, academics for the last 20, 30 years have used the metaphor of performing identities a lot, but at Eurovision it literally happens. The collective identities we see at Eurovision are there to be seen through performance. So, unlike some of the other people you're going to hear today, I'm not somebody who really researches the inside of Eurovision so much as the outside and its wider cultural impact. I'm going to be talking a bit of a bigger picture probably than some of the other papers, which will be much more hands-on about how Eurovision actually happens. I'm interested in things like what kinds of political developments have been reflected through Eurovision at some very different historical moments, and what kinds of stories are told about Eurovision. Like, you know, if you think back to 2014 when Conchita Wurst won Eurovision, and it still felt like it was overshadowed by those protests there had been against Russia hosting the Sochi Olympics after the Russian government had passed anti-LGBT laws. I'm interested in what kinds of stories people kind of use Eurovision to tell, as well as what does Eurovision and its performances tell itself. And one of the things which began to, almost trouble me a few years ago was what does it mean to audiences today to be celebrating Europe at the annual party that Eurovision represents, when at the same time we also know that hundreds of people a year and now thousands of people a year are dying on the way to Europe, escaping conflict and environmental devastation? Is it still as much of a pleasure to celebrate Europe as it was when the 12 stars of the European Union seemed to stand for a dream of openness and prosperity that Europe was expanding and many more people were going to be able to reach? But of course, even as Europe was expanding, the European Union was already becoming the fortified space that it is today. Now, of course, the European Broadcasting Union is not the European Union. I'm not sure how much of the wider public knows that. Many British Eurovision researchers, I think, since the Brexit referendum, have been asked half-jokingly, does this mean we're leaving Eurovision as well? But I think it is notable and it deserves mention that Eurovision, which is so often mocked as a festival of kitsch or inauthentic emotion, was able to also invite its audience to hold in mind what else was happening in Europe through, for instance, the Grey People performance in one of the semi-finals in in 2016, it reminded me of the Abide With Me sequence in the opening of the London Olympics, which acknowledged that only a day after winning the Olympic bid, Londoners had suffered the attacks of 7/7. I wish the grey people had been to the final so that more people had seen it. And, you know, I was very sorry the BBC decided instead it was going to show a sketch comedy about Swedish meatballs, but there we are. To come back to the wider points, what kinds of stories do people tell around Eurovision? Since Conchita first won Eurovision, and you know, even since Eurovision 2016, Europeans who believe in diversity and who had been counting on the European future becoming more diverse have, just like their American counterparts, had to come to terms instead with a moment of increasing populism and authoritarianism. Turkey, for instance, 10 years ago was a thriving democracy. Like every other country in Eurovision, had a story to tell, shifting between the ethno-pop that gives so much of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus a shared musical heritage, to the rock music, which was the other kind of very characteristic style of entry that you got from Turkey in the 2000s. Both of those were performing, if we use that metaphor again, a modern and transnational 21st century Turkey. Now, Turkey, of course, hasn't taken part in Eurovision since 2012, while the repression of the Gezi Park process in 2013 marked the beginning of an increasing wave of authoritarianism control. That's not the ever more free and diverse Turkey we saw being performed in front of us 10 years ago at Eurovision. Yet the so-called, what political scientists call democratic backsliding, the reversal of hope for democratisation and progress, is also very 21st century. And meanwhile, the British government has exposed 3 million people who believe they had an unconditional right to live here to, at best, extreme uncertainty about their status. Even more people feel less secure in Europe than they used to. What does that then mean for the Eurovision Song Contest and the hopes and dreams that people invest in Eurovision itself? One of probably the most quoted lines that a Eurovision researcher has written is probably something that Peter Reberg wrote about Eurovision in 2007. That was the year that Marija Šerifović was about to win Eurovision for Serbia, with, for what many viewers was a very queer-coded song. And Reberg wrote that Eurovision is somewhere where queerness and nationality do not have to be mutually exclusive. He thought it was a rare occasion where queer people have access to a sense of nationality, where you can celebrate both those identities at once. Now, when he was writing, there was a sense of hope and openness that there was going to be more spaces where people could feel like that, where LGBT people could count on being able to feel like they belonged on the same terms as straight people. And then, when a hard-won momentum started to build up towards guaranteeing trans people civil rights, the space where queerness and national belonging can come together today feels, across Europe and in the USA, under much more siege than it might have felt 10 years ago. The same Russian politician who drove the anti-LGBT laws I mentioned through the Russian parliament, Vitaly Milanov, is the one also campaigning for Russia to leave Eurovision, and it's for the same reason, so that Russian television doesn't have to broadcast what he's called the Europe-wide gay parade, but is the Eurovision Song Contest. So that's the kind of pressure that Russian television and Russian contestants in recent years have been under in their home country, even as some Eurovision fans outside Russia were feeling uncomfortable about them promoting Russia at all. Now, these are the kinds of politics of human rights that, of course, the Olympic movement has to cope with. But the Olympics doesn't have the LGBT history that the Eurovision Song Contest does, which is something else that makes it such a special occasion. The meanings that Eurovision has had to many LGBT people around Europe, firstly through their fandom, and then secondly from the late 1990s onwards, starting to be able to see some queer identities openly on screen as well. Many fans believe for that reason that history makes it all the more important that Eurovision should continue to protect and expand on that space and not to compromise on it. And for instance, to support the broadcasters who could be under pressure in their home countries, not to broadcast this convergence of queerness and nationhood that we've just talked about back home. And the The question then that you might ask from a practical point of view, how to reconcile this with the incredibly important Eurovision tradition that the right to host travels with the winner of Eurovision, something which makes Eurovision unique as a symbolic international competition. Academics often compare Eurovision with the Olympics, but the Olympic movement would never have been able to put Tallinn and Riga at the centre of its story, the way that Eurovision did at the turn of the millennium. And actually that's something that breathed new life into Eurovision. Looking towards Lisbon then, and in 2018, I was thinking about this last weekend because I was on panels about creativity and protest at something called the Freedom Festival in Hull. And that made me think next year we're in Portugal for Eurovision. And one of the famous Portuguese Eurovision stories is that a Eurovision song was the signal for the beginning of the preparation of the Carnation Revolution against the dictatorship in 1974. Every host country tells a story about its history, its identity, and how it fits into Europe. And RTP, the Portuguese broadcasters, said in launching Lisbon's welcome video in July, Europe has always been plural, yet its legacy represents the wish for a brighter future with one another. Today, the city of diversity, respect and tolerance, with a society of all colours and creeds that shares the values Eurovision stands for, invites everyone to celebrate this willingness to come together and to stand united. Portugal has spent 500 years connected to the oceans, Lisbon's welcome video reminds us. Most of those 500 years, of course, were part of Portugal's and Europe's colonial past. It's a fair question to ask how far the narratives of Eurovision 2018 will account for or not account for that history. But if one way or another Portugal's first Eurovision will be sure to take place in the sign of freedom and diversity, what kinds of Europe might its fans be imagining? Perhaps a Europe where the sea is a welcome. Perhaps a Europe where the whole Pride family of flags has its place in public. But we'll find out how that's going to be imagined by fans and by contestants as Lisbon comes closer next year. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Are there any immediate points there that you would like to respond to?
This was a very good speech. I think you touched on many of the topics that is important for me and important for the EBU as an organization and important for public service broadcasting. You were pointing out a lot of the values that we carry with the Eurovision Song Contest. And you're absolutely right. This is a place where a small country like Estonia can get exactly the same attention as Germany on the exact same stage for the same 3 minutes. And it doesn't matter where in Europe you come from, a big country, a small country, a rich country or a poor country, you will have the same attention and the same possibilities. I'm myself coming from a small country up north. I'm from Norway, and I remember the first time we won Eurovision Song Contest in Gothenburg with Bobby Socks. And the country exploded, literally. I've never seen people were celebrating in the streets because it was so important for a small country to be recognized on that stage and to actually win it. So it is important. And values for me, for the EBU, for Eurovision Song Contest, is also something that we cherish a lot. The good values that has to be reflected within the competition, because this is first of all the competition, but then all the values that is such a vital part of Eurovision Song Contest is important to us. So thanks a lot for your speech. I think it was very good.
And thanks for the invitation to be part of a panel. I'm a lifelong Eurovision fan as well, as like Catherine mentioned. My first memory is, guess the age now, okay? 1976, Brotherhood of Man winning. I remember being a kid watching that with the family unit. So yeah, this has been with me for my life, and luckily enough, in terms of my higher education and my academic career, I've used it since my master's degree to kind of follow this through. So I've explored a number of areas which you'll be able to find. I've done Eurovision fandom, done stuff about branding, post-2004. I've done a couple of articles this year which has been about politics and pop at the Eurovision, for reasons that some of you would probably be expected that we've been asked to talk about politics and pop. But for an unfathomable reason today, I've decided today would be the first time I would talk about music at the RMA. At the RM conference, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just like, what am I thinking to sit in front of you guys with your, probably various musicological and otherwise hats on? So there may be a fairly light touch about some of the comments I'm going to make in relation to the music of Eurovision, but I just hope you kind of get the principles of what I'm looking at today. And actually, I think I'm more nervous about, for the first time ever, looking very 21st century and reading off an iPad. This is what is actually making me feel really quite tense. Not meeting Jon Ola or seeing you guys, but anyway, let's see how we go. So, as well as being a researcher whose main focus thus far has been on themes relating to the Eurovision, I'm also a lifelong fan. And each year people presume that I will be able to predict the winner based on an assumption that being a fan has somehow bestowed me with the ability to prophesise the winner. They think that after all the years of watching and listening to the performances and songs, that I can predict what will delight the combined music tastes of the pan-European and indeed increasingly global voting public and professional music juries. Well, I can't always, and I don't always, that's for sure. And much like the late Terry Wogan, the former BBC commentator, I'm always more than entertained by the glorious unpredictability of it all. Who would have predicted ahead of their first semi-final performance at the Eurovision in 2016 that the Ukraine would steal a victory from the overwhelming Russian favourite that year? Talk about politics of pop. Today I've chosen to consider the success of mainly Eurovision winners and whether these songs might be on trend with the current contemporary popular music mainstream, or whether there's a slight time delay to music styles that have been popular in the past. Do Eurovision songs follow a particular formula, and are Eurovision songs occupying a certain canon of popular music, certain styles and certain genres? For me, every year, one of the main draws of the contest is the mix of music styles and performances. They highlight a heterogeneous mix of music cultures across the continent and beyond. I don't think I've ever seen two contests the same, and actually, from year to year, I think we see a difference in the type of songs that win. And yet there's familiarity in these songs. Countries share a mix of the familiar and the unknown, music drawn from rock, pop, country, and dance music genres are often mixed with the more localised indigenous musical styles that the wider viewing audience may not be familiar with. But there is some kind of symbiosis across these areas. Perhaps signalising the Western influence of the lens of Eurovision on music styles and music tastes, there seems to be a diluting down or a standardising of these local music styles to be successful on the Eurovision stage, in terms of winning this is. At this point, I'd recommend my colleague here, Catherine Baker, recommend her article Wild Dances and Dying Wolves, which looks at essentialism and teases out some of these issues to do with identity being performed on the Eurovision stage and through the musics that are chosen, specifically in relation to Ruslana, 2004 Wild Dances. When we watch the Eurovision, we can see that diversity is an important part of it. And this is one of the main aims, as Catherine's already touched on, of the broadcasters involved in the collective European Broadcasting Union. The EBU is a collective of public service media, and the fundamental principles of the EBU are very much in line with diversity, pluralism and community, as you've already heard. So participating countries bring with them their musical differences as much as they do their musical similarities, something which has particularly been welcomed via the rapid expansion of participating countries in the 90s and the noughties, which really did bring the Eastern Bloc out from the cold, back from the cold rather, send them back now. The ESC is one of the longest running television programmes in the world. In 2018, it will approach its 63rd edition. Its musical legacy is long and impactful. Think here of breakthrough acts such as ABBA and Celine Dion on the international music scene. And recent mainstream chart successes such as Lena's Satellite from Germany in 2010 and Euphoria from Loreen in 2012. Yet at times it has also been derided as banal popular music with no substance, which is kind of hard to disagree with at times when you analyse, let's say, the lyrics of the winning song from 1968, Maciel's La La La. The lyrical genius it contained 138 la's. Music at times seen as perhaps a little lagging behind the mainstream and a little unfashionable. Nevertheless, over 60 years later, this media event and the music it produces is more popular than ever. I'd like to avoid giving you the history timeline today, but rather to highlight on some key themes and key areas of that timeline which allow us to kind of identify the types of music that are popular at the Eurovision. And as I've already said, I will admit that I'm no musicologist or indeed a musician, so I'm on thin ice here to some extent. But I would recommend for those of you who are more in tune with that area of academia to maybe look at the work, if you haven't already, of Alf Bjornberg. He did papers back in the 90s that looked particularly at the musical structures and the musical styles of Eurovision song, as well as an edited collection from colleague Ivan Rakoff and other colleagues. It seems that music participating in and especially winning the Eurovision has always been commercially popular. Now I know that again that's a bit of a broad sweep, but kind of bear with me. The standout early worldwide hit was Nel Blu di Punto di Blu, sung by Danamico Mongduno. Please forgive my pronunciation of these titles. That song is better known as Volare. It wasn't a Eurovision winner, but it was the first ever Grammy Award winner for Record of the Year and Song of the Year at the very first Grammy Awards in 1958. And that song was a ballad in the dramatic chanson style, which was very much the oeuvre of the early years of the Eurovision, which launched in 1956. Fast forward to 1965, which was a very important year for the Eurovision, indeed a milestone year, because that was the first time that a pop song had won the competition. Up until then, all the previous winners had been ballads. Luxembourg's winning entry, Poupée de cire, Poupée de sang, was composed by French artist Serge Gainsbourg and performed by 17-year-old France Gall. It was inspired, here we go people, by the fourth movement Prestissimo in F minor from Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 1. Remember that for Countless? Pointless. Anyone Pointless? What was that song? What was it? The song went on to become an international hit and had huge impact on the types of songs that then would be entered into the Eurovision over the following years. Eurovision's transition into the more modern-sounding pop song would continue, and also broadening the appeal of cross-generational music styles. Indeed, from my perspective, I see it as a little like the emergence of rock and roll in the 1950s, where the music of the swooners and the crooners, popularised for an older demographic of mums and dads, was now being challenged by the music stylings being aimed at a younger audience. And I see this as not for nothing. The Eurovision has always had cross-generational appeal because the music styles that were within it reflected back to the viewing audience the taste of the music that they had. In the 1970s, the visual stylings of ABBA and other acts seemed to embrace the glam rock vibe of the time, yet no one other than ABBA had more successfully tipped their hat to the music of that time via their victory with Waterloo in 1974. It seemed to be music keeping pace with music at the time. By 1977, disco had gone to the masses thanks in a major part, to movies such as Saturday Night Fever, and in 1978 it won the Eurovision via Israel's Abanibi. Yet further evidence of popular music tastes from outside the contest being catered for and seen within the Eurovision. It seems like popular genre of music in the mainstream were latterly popular on the Eurovision stage. Indeed, it feels like familiarity reaping rewards. Eurovision being in touch with the contemporary culture, it would seem. Now, the Eurovision is a light entertainment programme, and in order to be a light entertainment programme, it needs to entertain. And to do that, it needs to feature music that is of interest and entertaining, music that's familiar. So there's going to be a comfort in the familiar, and songs at Eurovision need to reflect mainstream music so that there can be familiarity to the television viewers, often seeing some of these songs for the first time. And that said, familiarity also breeds contempt when there's pseudo-standardisation of songs within the contest. Does everything start to sound the same? Does everything mimic another song? Whilst I do believe and would defend that over the years there is diversity and a vibrant mix of music within the Eurovision, it's hard to escape the fact that there's a certain amount of recycling and copycatting of entries over the years, both in terms of musical styles and also lyrical content. The seemingly lowest common denominator standardised type of song format fits the well-worn critique of popular music as being just that, of little value or interest due to its lack of originality. For every la la la, there's been a boom bada boom and a pump pump. Although we should remember that the banal sounding lyrics were often an attempt to try and circumvent the language rule where countries were limited to sing in certain languages. Everyone couldn't at certain points choose to sing in English, for example. Also, the tight rules on composition may themselves place limits on what composers could do. The limit of a 3-minute pop song also restricts the opportunity to veer too far away from perhaps the traditional pop song structure, typically AABA. So it got me thinking in terms of the more recent years of Eurovision. Are we seeing a reflection of songs within the Eurovision, say in 2016, reflecting the music that is popular around in the mainstream at the same time, or say 2015 into 2016? The best-selling global songs of 2016 include Drake with One Dance, Justin Bieber, Love Yourself, Sia's Cheap Thrills, Rihanna's Work, and Lucas Graham's 7 Years. And when we look at this list of songs and look at songs competing at Eurovision, we can make some quite neat links. So Justin Bieber's highly popular Love Yourself, released in 2015, is clearly influential, if you listen to it, if you haven't heard it, to Sweden's Franz with If I Was Sorry in 2016. In the same way that Sia's Chandelier, released in 2014, is clearly signposted in Australia's Damn It In Sound of Silence in 2016, in the same way that Måns Zelmerlöw's Heroes of 2015 owes much of its melody to Avicii's Wake Me Up in 2013. And here's the key point. This is the key point of the paper. I put it in bold and everything, so that must be key. Should have put it in red as well, and pressed the button and had Richard do Today again. So the key point I want to get across to you today is perhaps we can identify a Eurovision winner as an original song that we already know without having heard it. Yeah? So it's an original song that we already know without having heard it. I think that's the key these days. How else do you capture the ear and the eye, the spectacle of Eurovision of over 40 competing countries if, when they hear the song, there isn't some kind of immediate recollection of something they haven't heard before? Some other areas, conscious of time, if this was a longer paper, I'd tease out some of these themes. But yeah, so success at Eurovision, is it predicated on singing in English? Strangely enough, 27 marks the first time in a decade that a song sung completely in a non-English language has won the competition. Some countries are very adamant to sing in their own language, and certain countries, France in particular, have quite tight controls, say in terms of radio airplay, the amount of indigenous music has to be sung in French, and there's tariffs as to what they have to play. And in 2008, French culture ministers went into meltdown because their entry by Sébastien Tellier was going to be partly sung in English. Similarly, a few years ago, Spain's entry for the first time was sung entirely in English, and again, there was kind of marching in the streets and people protesting, so there's clearly something interesting about national identity and the prospect of your country singing in English on the Eurovision stage. But is that going to be one of the keys to success at Eurovision? Are Eurovision winners commercially successful? Well, I would say, do they need to be? It depends. It depends what the motive of the countries is. Are you singing in the contest to participate, or are you singing in the contest to compete? And I think the two are different. And clearly there are some countries who are participating with a style of music that isn't going to capture that mainstream ear of the pan-European audience. Are Eurovision winners European in music style? Much though countries increasingly over the years these days are kind of moving over to kind of like a more urban contemporary feel, incorporating hip-hop and rapping and that kind of thing, Eurovision songs and its reception at Eurovision seem to be slightly distanced from that. So it's almost as if through the EBU and the fundamental principles of kind of the public service media being cosmopolitan and European and heterogeneous, it's almost as if there's a distancing away from the kind of more Americanized forms of popular music.
You need to wind up.
I will. Thank you. I told you not to wind me up. Anyway, I've got to sum up there, so I've got one more paragraph. Perhaps this year, more than ever, seeing as how the Eurovision comes full circle, Portugal won with a song which harked back to the origins of the contest during its earliest phase, between 56 and 64, prior to the first pop victory. Salvador Sobral won with his love ballad, Amar por los Dios. He said on receiving the trophy, "We live in a world of fast food music. This is a victory for music. Music isn't fireworks, music is feeling." His rather pointed comment seems to oppose the current trend for big spectacle performances. For me, however, the irony in this victory in particular is that we have a reflection back to the chanson era of the Eurovision, which is separated by almost 50 years. It's still highly popular. This song was the first winner in a triple metre since Ireland's The Voice won in 1997. Okay, people, yeah, write it down. The first song sung in triple metre to win since 97. So compositionally, it's different. It's sung in a non-English language. An unexpected winner deviating from the norm. Also, a deliberately stripped-back presentation of a singer with a song on a stage and nothing else, almost the anti-spectacle. So to sum up, my thinking about the music at the Eurovision. Seemingly, Eurovision songs don't lead the mainstream, they echo it. Also, Eurovision winners aren't afraid to go old school, even in 2017. And seemingly, we, the viewers, don't seem to mind. This year, Portugal provided the winning song that received the most points ever and was an international success with its roots firmly in the 1950s. This demonstrates, if nothing else, that when it comes to winning the Eurovision, as ABBA suggested way back in 1974, the history book on the shelf is always repeating itself. And the same is true with the Eurovision. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Jonola, is there anything there immediately that needs correcting or
Not correcting.
mentioning?
No.
Homework marked, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think it's important also to see and to recognize the stage performance as a part of the success in Eurovision Song Contest, not only the song. If you see Conchita and that performance, it was a strong song, but together with the performance, the LED screen, everything that comes with it, created a moment in Europe, really a moment. The same with Salvador Sobral, really fragile, alone on that small stage in the crowd, created a moment. And same with Loreen 2012. And so it's very much up to the whole package to define who is the winner. But I think you pointed out some really interesting things here about the genres and also the variety. And when we know how much each broadcaster actually work on their performance to make sure that they can deliver something that is solid, good, and will be recognized, it is something that is different if you come from Moldova or from Ireland. There are musical differences that you have to take into account. That's why it will never be something as a Eurovision genre. It will be localized and also, as you point out, more and more countries actually going back to perform in their own language, which makes the diversity even better and greater. So, yeah, thanks.
See, just a little patience is all I needed from the beginning. Okay, so feeling Eurovision, and actually, Jonola, unwittingly, you have what you just said is the point of my paper. So sorry about that. When I put this together, I've been watching the contest since 1970, so I'm really old. And of course, the key thing for me was Ireland winning, my nation winning. A very small country in the fringes of Europe, and it was a very important moment when we were seen to be the only thing we were good at for many, many years. So I've written a lot about national identity, but I'm going to talk about affect and feeling and emotion. When Salvador Sobral won the 2017 Eurovision Song Contest for Portugal with Amar pelos dois, translated as Loving for Both of Us, sung entirely in Portuguese, fans, commentators and pundits were baffled. Just how could a retro jazz waltz with a nod to Brazilian bossa nova triumph over songs staged with spectacular pyrotechnics, video walls and ever-changing LED flooring? Predicting Eurovision success has long baffled producers and pundits alike, to the point where last month Irish TV company RTE hosted a seminar on the subject after a long run of entries that failed to even qualify for the final. So what is it that makes a song connect with a televiewing public in a 3+ hour long live reality show across a European map stretching from Iceland to the Caspian Sea? Sweden's triumphant entry of 2014, Måns Zelmerlöw's Heroes, and Russia's 2016 entry that placed first in the televoting and third overall, that's Sergei Lazarev's You Are the Only One, pointed to a trend of visual storytelling that treated the singer as a protagonist of a 3-minute film, in which, according to sofabet.com blogger Eurovicious, the song acted as backdrop to the visual storytelling rather than the other way round. Many believe that singing in English raised the chances of hooking the audience. However, Salvador's song, penned by his sister Luisa, was sung entirely in Portuguese and put paid to the generally held perception of English being the lingua franca of Eurovision. Others believe either song or artist has to connect on a much wider socio-political level. For instance, the 2016 Ukrainian winning song 1944 by Yamala might be remembered for its highly political opening reference in English to the deportation of Crimean Tatars by Stalin as a historical counterpoint to the 2014 annexation of Crimea from Ukraine by Russia, although the emotional resonance of the song actually lay in its chorus, sung in the Crimean Tatar language, not in English. We need to go back, as Phil said, 10 years to 2007 to find the last winner of the contest to sing exclusively, not in English. Maria Sarifovic is for Serbia singing Molitva, or prayer. It too was a ballad of great emotional intensity and was layered, as Catherine said, with a stage representation of woman as nation with a highly queer resonance after almost 3 decades of violent conflict in the region. But Salvador Sobral's song had no such narrative staging in Kiev and suggested no wider political or socio-political reading by viewers. He stood alone on a small satellite stage with the main stage and the audience as his backdrop, embedding himself within the context of the contest, dressed in loose black clothing and sporting a highly dishevelled man bun. He was not a metaphor for anything but himself, with his at times nervous tics contributing to a 3-minute televisual meme of effective sincerity. And I'll come to the notion of effect presently, but perhaps it's worthwhile explaining that his performance did not occur in a vacuum. He did have a backstory in the form of a very serious heart condition, delaying his arrival at the contest by a week, with his sister Louisa standing in for him at early rehearsals, providing a narrative of anticipated failure to appear or to perform. He was outspoken politically about the migrant crisis in Europe at a press conference when he did arrive, contravening the non-political rules of the contest. But it is highly doubtful that this backstory had any impact on voting patterns in the same way as the Conchita versus Russian political homophobia had in 2013. His song was not of the power ballad variety of recent winners, Conchita or Jamala, or had any of the visual storytelling potential of Mons or Sergei. Alone on the tiny satellite stage, Salvador required the audience to remain unusually silent for 3 minutes and ignore the intrusion of the cameras. No nods, no winks, no looks to the viewers at home. Salvador was singing for himself, largely oblivious to the live audience and making no concessions to the TV audience. Performing unself-consciously, almost in an improvised fashion, as seen in those nervous tics, defied the performance of every other song that was choreographed and scripted to precision over many rehearsals. Not playing to a script, of course, increased our perception of his sincerity. Singing in one of Europe's lesser-spoken languages, viewers had to rely on the national commentator's introduction to the subject of the song to have a clue as to its content. But it didn't matter, as it was clear that this performance was effective in itself to convey the message of being in a love unrequited. Now, affect, as noted by Eurovision musicologist Euros Fura, quote, arises not from content or form, but from an effective economy that produces politics of sincerity, end quote. Salvador's performance stood out in his sincerity by not using the high-tech Eurovision stage, but used a still forest image as backdrop, and used as a bridge the live audience and the torch facility on their phones. As such, he appeared on TV to be connected to his live audience through their performance of light and silence. It was the audience, not him. This real connection between performer and listener produced what Fura calls an affect, or an immediate reaction to a stimulus before a cognitive response. The relation between sensation and emotion also leads to an impression. The light retro jazz with swirling strings and piano in the opening few bars of the song further contribute to the immediacy of the impression with its referencing in wider popular culture of what is termed as the retro techno age of vinyl, of technology of the past and its own visions of the future. Now compare this to the globally successful film that was released in Europe at the end of 2016. Retro techno, that's the forest. Sorry, I missed that. La La Land, with its longer tale of Amar Pelos Dors. The song A Lovely Night dovetails with Sobral's song, not only in its strings and piano instrumentation, but also in terms of its staging against a static backdrop of Hollywood and its dreams. Cut to the Eurovision stage in 2017, and here we also see the City of Stars, with the Eurovision stage as Hollywood and its lights its fan stars. Further, we can compare it to another Hollywood film, Disney's 2017 remake of Beauty and the Beast, another tale of Amar Pelos Dors, and in the song Tale as Old as Time, with similar instrumentation. Both songs from both films are of course duets between lovers, and there's a hint at resolution. But in Eurovision, Salvador has already lost. alone on the small stage, dressed in somber black, like a tiny animal in a static Disney forest, Salvador marks his difference from and similarity with characters in wider cultural frames, similar to what Phil was saying. If we understand this Eurovision song as a 3-minute film, then we can interpret the immediate sensation of the opening bars leading to our wider cultural mediation that helps the non-Portuguese speaking viewer find an access to the song, that it is endorsed by an almost identical scenographic backdrop in wider culture, in film culture. But Salvador does not interpolate us through the camera, so how do we stay connected after the initial moment of cultural recognition? Now this is where his performance of the song is crucial to its connectivity with viewers. Ignoring the cameras and even his live audience for the most part, he appears to perform the song with an interior emotionality. But singing is a performance, and emotions are performed in social terms, by and large, when we express them. And so Salvador's performance of interiority appears to contradict its intention of externalization. And yet he does externalize, but it appears only for himself. And so we become voyeurs of this man in black, all alone, lit by torchlight. Far from being alienated from the singer singing for himself in a language most Eurovisions do not understand, Salvador's performance and its seemingly simplistic staging actually work to engender fellow feeling. And while his emotion appears to be coming from an interior place and moving out to us, the song's opening bars and sweeping spider cam long shot actually work in the opposite direction. Our instant recognition of the wider cultural frame, both musically and visually, with their nostalgic longing, not for a lost past, but for a hoped-for future, a retro future, a retrovision of the future, taking us all on the outside and moving us into the object of feeling. And from that object of feeling, we move outwards from the object and his feelings towards ourselves, at home, with our cell phones at hand, feeling the singer's feelings as our feelings. This is what Sarah Ahmed in The Cultural Politics of Emotion terms the sociality of emotion. And this is further compounded by the live audiences in both the semi-final and final performances that spontaneously endorse the feeling as their own through their applause after the first chorus, but respectively suppressed it for the second verse. The sociality of emotions in this particular context was highly performative from a televisual perspective in its unique way of prompting us to connect ourselves to the emotion and thus the song, and then to vote. Without the additional political contexts of Conchita's or Jamala's successes, or the visual narratives of triumph over adversity, as we saw with Mons and Sergei, Salvador Sobral stripped the connection of the television audience to the core mediation of any televoting success through the sociality of emotion, when audiences are feeling Eurovision. Thank you.
Very well timed as well, Brian. 2 seconds under your... Jan Ola, once more, is there anything immediately that you would like to comment on?
It was very interesting speech, I've talked a lot with the Portuguese broadcaster, and what they did last year when they revamped their whole national selection, and they started to look for different talents in order to come up with something they could be proud of, something someone who could make an impact in Eurovision Song Contest, and then found both him and his sister and brought them to the Eurovision stage. It had enormous impact in Portugal, and they see now the interest around the Eurovision Song Contest is totally different, and also for the national selection they can now attract every high-end composer and artist in Portugal. So sometimes it's important for the broadcasters to put a foot on the ground and just say, where are we? What can we do? How can we change? How can we develop? Because Portugal for many years didn't do very well in the Eurovision Song Contest. This is their first victory, and what a victory. I think it was fantastic. Thanks a lot.
I've titled my paper Eurovision Fandom, A Personal Perspective, because I'm going to be talking about my own fandom in relation to Eurovision. And I class myself as a Eurovision fan. Why? Well, because I've always watched the contest, and I can't remember not watching the contest. I'm also a member of the fan club. As soon as I found out there was a fan club, I decided to join. I'm going to try my best French now. It's the Organisation Générale des Amateurs de l'Eurovision, but we know it as OGAE, OJ. And I joined in the 1990s, and I've been fortunate enough to attend a number of finals. The first one was Dublin in 1994, and most recently Vienna in 2015. And I'm obviously keeping everything crossed in the hope of getting a ticket for Lisbon next year, following Portugal's victory. And as has been said, it's the first time they've won. They first joined Eurovision in 1964, so they had to wait a long time for victory. So I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic event. Now, of course, all Eurovision fans are different, and I'm not in any way purporting to be representing all fans of the contest. But I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about my own experiences as a fan, specifically in relation to being part of the audience at a number of contests, and to consider the changes in audience behaviour within the auditorium in terms of familiarity with and reception of the songs during live performance. Perhaps a good way to describe how audience reactions have changed is to consider traditional modes of behaviour by those attending classical music concerts and attendees at rock or pop concerts. And I'm sure we all know that there's a sort of unwritten code of conduct in terms of how we behave at these various concerts. So if you're at a classical music concert, the expectation is that you will sit quietly and listen, and then at the end you clap politely, maybe enthusiastically, and you're stifling any urge to cough or sneeze until there's a suitable break in the performance. At a pop concert, well, it's much more free and easy. So people stand up, they dance, they sing, they whistle, they shout, they move around, they go and get drinks, they come back. It's a very different sort of audience reception. Now, Eurovision audiences in the contest's early days were much more akin to traditional classical music audiences, as I've described them. However, in more recent years, reactions to performances matched those at pop concerts. Certainly, when I attended my first Eurovision in Dublin in 1994, it was a fairly formal affair. Everyone dressed quite smartly for the occasion, and it would have been considered rude for somebody to speak or leave their seat while the performances were in progress. I was lucky enough to get a ticket for the following year, in fact, and I remember very clearly one audience member who was nearby me reprimanding somebody else because they dared to whisper while a performance was in place. Having not attended a live contest since 2001, I was very excited about returning to the fold and eagerly went along to the 2001 contest, which took place in Dusseldorf. And I actually went along with members of the fan club. And I was quite taken aback as to how things had changed. Not only were people wandering around, getting drinks while artists were performing, but rather than sitting and listening to the songs, everyone was on their feet and even standing on the seats, actually, at some points. I was astounded to hear a lot of those who were around me singing along to the songs, regardless of the language in which they were being sung. Now, as you can see, I'm not very tall, I'm just over 5 foot. So not only was I struggling to see those on stage, but also their dulcet tones were being replaced by a cacophony of sounds from the fans in the aisles. And they'd clearly listened to their advance purchase CD, which you can now get, and knew all the songs from this official compilation. So they knew the words, but maybe their tuning wasn't as good as it could have been. Despite being a fan all my life, I suddenly felt very alienated from the event, and I doubted I would return. Surely I would have a better experience sitting in front of my television, actually seeing and hearing the real performers rather than members of the crowd. And I think this is something that maybe touches what Brian has spoken about, and the difference perhaps if you're in that crowd when Salvador was performing, or if you're watching on the television, and the impression that you get of a performance. However, being a fan, I decided to have another go, and I did return when the contest was held in Copenhagen in 2014. Now, by this time, there was a fan zone. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but anyone who wished to stand could actually now do so quite close to the stage, and thankfully it was out of my earshot. But I realised my experiences raised some interesting points, and it may be something that it's worth debating. Most people listening to songs in the final, whether in the hall or in their homes, will be doing so for the first time. For dedicated fans, however, access to performances prior to the contest is easier than ever. Now, I'm old enough to remember the previews that they used to be on UK TV. I don't know if anybody else is, but a couple of weeks prior to the contest, on a Sunday afternoon, there used to be a preview of what the songs were, and you had actual preview sort of tapes. And that was your opportunity to hear the songs. You know, you couldn't access, obviously, the songs on YouTube, or the CDs weren't in existence. But now you can. You know, so many internet sites, you can access the songs in advance. There are also fan polls where you can vote for your faves prior to the contests, and their songs often labelled fan favourites, thereby making a distinction between listeners deemed fans and those who are maybe more casual audience members. And I think this year's fan favourite was actually Italy, which was a very big contrast from Salvador's song. It involved a man dressed as a gorilla who was dancing around various moves, and that was a fan favourite, and I think it came third or fourth. Despite my experience, however, it's important to know that in their study of the 2014 contest, and again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing names, but there were 4 writers for this article, Skye, Kyriakidu, McCurdy and Oldham note that, quote, "There is also something to be said here about the meaningfulness of the musical content of the contest. Fans of the show constantly debated their favourite songs and proudly expressed their in-depth knowledge of previous competitions and performers. For them, the music is a key element," unquote. This is an interesting observation, given that there's much debate about geopolitics, so-called block voting and voting patterns. For example, the predictable reciprocal 12-point exchange between Greece and Cyprus, regardless of the quality of each other's songs. That's assuming they both get to the final, of course. Sadly, in the UK, prior to this year's contest, there was much more media coverage about the possible impact of Brexit than to performer Lucy Jones and her ballad Never Give Up on You. And of course, a lot was made of the fact that it was Never Give Up on You, and people changed the U to EU and said, you know, never give up on you. It's a political comment and all sorts of things. I would argue that despite the changes in audience behaviour, dedicated fans are appreciative of strong songs and performers. Opinions will inevitably differ as to which songs are better. We have diverse opinions and tastes, but I would suggest that Eurovision enthusiasts are genuinely voting for the songs that they like, regardless of the country of origin. So, just to sum up, although viewer habits have changed over the years, fans of the contest actually still want their favourite song to win, regardless of the country of the performer. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Jan Ola, anything there?
Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that you're a fan. Fans are extremely important for the Eurovision Song Contest. They give so much color, so much energy, and so much attitude to the contest. They are really and valuable inputs. My mailbox is every year almost full of good suggestions, not so good suggestions, how we should take it, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. But this is just examples of about how much they care about the song contest, and when you see how much color they add to the transmission of the shows, the standing audience now, and you're right. When you go back, not so many years, it was a totally different vibe in the venue, I am in the venue during the transmissions, and it's pretty loud. I mean, it's like a locomotive.
Whereabouts are you? In the auditorium area?
Yes, yes, in the auditorium area, and it's loud. It's fun. It's a real party out there, and I think that gives so much back to the transmissions, and so thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.
I must tell you, yes, I enjoy Eurovision a lot, and I have to say, whenever I'm watching Eurovision, the more I drink, the more I like it, and I think I'm not alone in that. There is this celebratory party atmosphere that happens even when you're at home watching. But I have been interested in other topics, some related to Catherine's, of imagining the nation, and then how does your nation relate to Europe? Should you have something that reminds people of your country? Otherwise, you won't get enough tourists or whatever. Or should you do something that shows that you're right there with the modern world, and you know what you're presenting, a cosmopolitan style like your reggae Germany presented once. And this has been true right from the beginning of the contest. In the 1956 event, there weren't that many countries, so they were each allowed to enter 2 songs. And I thought typically, if you look at the German entry, you get that kind of chanson entry. It's like Weimar Cabaret, you know, im Wartensaal der letzten Glück or something. But along with something that people had thought, that's typically German, was Freddie Quinn, the German Elvis, singing So geht es jede Nacht. That's how it goes every night, singing a rock and roll song about his girlfriend problems. And this has continued. And even if you want to do something that suggests, oh yes, it's that country, I'm now thinking of Romania with their song Balkan Girls. And the 3 Balkan girls arrive at the dance club on horseback, and then dance and drink vodka and lager and all the rest of it, and no problem, the horses know the way home. So you get this mixture of natural, the modern, the Europe-wide. But today I just want to look at often the people who seem to be very mistrusted are the televoters, and there have been all sorts of theories of buddy voting, in the days of Terry Wogan, said, why do people living next to a country that they hate for the rest of the year give them 12 points? And this is a complex issue, because you can often find that a country next to another country has got a lot of people in it who used to be in that country and now voting for the country they left. But let's think about judges and juries. Try and get it on this slideshow. Oh, yeah, from beginning. This is very slow, isn't it? And, well, first thing, I'll just say something about the juries, because it's the Eurovision is a very transparent institution. You can get on the website, you can get all sorts of information, and the juries are what I'm now got to divide 5 into 210. Is that 42? 42 juries. They all have 5 members, and it's interesting to look at who are the typical people that you'd find on a jury. Well, actually, the most typical people you find on a jury are either singers or music producers. And Jan Ola will confirm this, but I suspect every country has the right to pick whatever jury they want. After those, of 210 jury members in all, 50 of them were people that wrote music, just 50. And I'm counting anyone, a singer-songwriter or someone that calls themselves a composer, and they're all listed, You're probably wondering in this organization how many academics are amongst the 210? Well, there are 6. There'll probably be more after this event, I think. So let's see how well these juries do. Well, it wouldn't be true to say that what a shock when Sobral won Eurovision, because he was already one of the bookies' favourites. And the bookies nearly always get things pretty close, otherwise they're going to lose a lot of money. And they can do this because, of course, there are official videos before the event. People could get to know songs, and artists tour around, and you get to know which songs are doing well. So on this slide, you'll see that aggregating all the bookies' odds that were given for Eurovision 2017, the number 1 bookie's choice was Bulgaria, number 2, Portugal, number 3, Belgium, number 4, Italy. Now let's see how jurors react to that. So Bulgaria knows that their number 1 rival is Portugal, so they give them 0 points. This sounds as if they're doing it out of meanness. Belgium's another rival, 0. Italy, the other rival, 0. Look at the televoters. No, Bulgarian televoters know that Portugal is in for a win, but they get 7. Okay, the other 2 get 0. Now look at what Portugal does in return. And they can't have deliberated really and saying, I know you're going to give us 0, we'll give you 0. But so Portugal hates the Bulgarian one, Bulgaria hates the Portuguese one, and yet these are the bookies' favourites. But the viewers don't behave like this. Now, it could be absolute coincidence here, but Italy, I'm surprised 3 of them give Italy 0. But in this case, it's the Italian jury, the Italian televoters that give Bulgaria 0. So there's something odd there. Now, let us look at what the winners would have been if there had just been televotes, just the audiences voting in for the people they liked. Well, look at that, the top 10 amongst viewers. Australia is nowhere there. But the juries all thought Australia was great. Well, it's number 4. Netherlands, Norway, the UK, the jury liked. They don't appear in the top 10 for the voters. And at the bottom you can see the ranks. Croatia, very interesting song, you know, with the double-voiced singer. Viewers I liked it a lot. It was later in the contest, it must have been. I liked that song, but number 22 for the jury. Romania, that was Yodel It. It was a yodeling song. Again, I find it typical. I can't ever see Switzerland entering a yodeling song because they would think, hey, we're not just going to stereotype ourselves. You say Switzerland and music to people, they think, oh, yodel lady. Yeah, no, Romania can do it. But no, the jurors didn't like it. Hungary, I was very surprised that it did so badly with the jury. Let's then look at now other indicators that happen very quickly. So on YouTube, you'll know that you can tick to like videos, to like songs. So I looked the day after the contest. It's not even 24 hours after the contest. Which are the videos, the songs that are most liked by people accessing YouTube? Well, Bulgaria comes out first, and then Moldova. Someone already mentioned, but Moldova suddenly became very, very popular with YouTube viewers. Ukraine, well, I don't know. Well, I suppose people said that Ukraine song was awful. Listen to it on YouTube. I don't know. You never know what is making people listen to these. But the weird thing is that Portugal is not there as one of the most liked Eurovision videos. Let's look at the 6 most disliked official ones, not the live at the contest ones. These are the official YouTube videos. Spain is the most liked official video, but Spain came number 26 in the contest. Ukraine was liked as a video. Here, I'm interested. What has happened with Portugal is that a lot of people did not like that video, and I'm one of them. I don't like it, but you know, I don't like sincerity, and some people do. Or you could rephrase, I don't like illusionistic realism, to put it in Brechtian terms, because I'm an academic. But so that is my presentation. You know, the whole voting is much more complicated, and those people, and perhaps the Brits have been amongst the worst in this, that see, you know, you can't trust foreigners to vote, but their juries might be more reliable. I actually think you can trust people a lot more than you can trust juries in all parts of musical activity, incidentally. Thank you. Well, how do you switch this off? I didn't know to switch it on. Now I don't know how to switch it off. If I do that, look at that.
You know, though, it appears you can save some money, do away with juries, and the algorithms of YouTube.
This is always interesting because there's a lot of debate and talks about juries and how people vote, and yeah, you said it all, and it's always interesting. But we put a lot of focus on this. This is actually one of our core struggle around not struggle, but we look a lot into how to secure the voting setup. When we reintroduced the juries in 2010, it was because we wanted to have a professional view on the songs and the artists and the performances. For a long time before that, it was only televotes. We see from 2010 and up till now that the quality, the music quality has increased. There are less jokes coming out of the performance, like all the turkey from Ireland or whatever. It's becoming more serious. We know for sure that songwriters and artists very much prefer to have a jury eye on what they do. So the 50-50 split is something that we think is good for the competition and good for the song contest. But I've seen a lot of these type of statistics, and you point out some things that we have to look into. But if we have juries, it will be more or less the setup we have now. We scrutinize every jury to make sure that they are music professionals. We pay a lot of attention to the whole setup, and hopefully we are able to give a fair and good result also from the juries. But it's always interesting to look at this.
Could I ask Jan Ola one question here? Because I am interested that there are so many music producers, because this is a live performance event. And you've got a lot of people that are used to studio work and mixing and all the rest of it, but it's, I wonder why so many countries feel music producers are to be trusted.
I don't know.
You don't know why?
No, but we leave it up to the participating broadcasters to pick the juries. They have to pick music professional. It has to be balanced. It has to be balanced according to gender and age, and they have to be music professionals. So, so why they use music or choose so many music producers, I don't know.
Actually, having mentioned gender and age is an interesting thing, because you can read all the ages of the jury members. You know that out of 210 jury members, 99 are 40 plus. There haven't been many demographic studies of the Eurovision audience, but there was a French one that showed that the average audience in France at that time was mid-20s, but most of the juries are over 40.
Yeah, that could be balanced much better, and this is what we look into every year to see how we can come up with the best possible jury setup, basically.
They nearly all seem to be between 21 and 38. There aren't many young people. There aren't many under 30 people. So one jury had a 16-year-old on, but that's very unusual.
Now we should let Jan-Ola have a. I'm sure he has something he would just like to say in response to everything more generally.
Well, first of all, thank you to all of you, because this is not the, let's say, the content I meet every day. I work a lot with Eurovision Song Contest. That's my main focus. I work out of Geneva with a quite small group of people. We have a partner set up around it, and we basically work with the host broadcaster to make sure that we have a good new edition of Eurovision Song Contest every year. And that is my main focus, basically, to make sure that we manage in this short time to deliver 3 flawless and spectacular shows in May every year. So to be invited to this type of discussion and to get your knowledge and your views on this is very valuable for me. So there's sure a lot to take home here.
When you say 3 shows, can you just make it clear to the delegates what you mean by 3 shows?
There are 3 shows. There are 2 semi-finals and a final every year, and that started in 2008. Before that, it was 1 semi-final and a final. Simply because the interest for Eurovision Song Contest is so high that we need to have this as 3 events during a week.
And isn't there a junior?
There's a junior edition coming up now in Tbilisi in November. We also have Eurovision Young Dancers, Eurovision Young Musicians. This year we've broadcasted for the first time Eurovision Choir of the Year. So there are several other Eurovision contests out there, but Eurovision Song Contest that we have been looking at today is by far the biggest and by far the most prestigious, and has been running for over 60 years.
How does it, for a day-to-day, in terms of day-to-day operation, how do you work? How is it set up?
We work out of Geneva with a quite small team there. We have strong legal presence, finance presence, and also myself overlooking the preparations basically with the host broadcaster. We also have a governing body consisting of members called the reference group. We meet 7 times a year, and that's sort of the board, the upper board that looks after the rules of the Eurovision Song Contest, and also can confirm certain stages of the preparation and approve that. And we have a very clear timeline that we give to the host broadcaster already, the new host broadcaster already on the day of the final when they win. So we started the talks with the Portuguese broadcaster on the day they won, and the week after I was in Lisbon and started to prepare by giving them all the tools they need to prepare for the song contest, and also the milestones they need to reach in order to actually be able to showcase 3 shows in May next year. So it's a lot of work actually on the ground.
And are you a public body in the sense that you are the financing comes from the public, from the purse of the European Broadcasting Union?
No, the financing of Eurovision Song Contest, it's a co-production. So every participating broadcaster is chipping into the co-production. Yeah. But most of the tab is actually picked up by the host broadcaster. They pay for the largest chunk of the production of Eurovision Song Contest. But then you can be in Eurovision Song Contest for many, many years without hosting it, and you will benefit from 7 hours of great content, and you don't need to pay more than your participation fee, which is quite moderate. But when you win it, you host it, and that is actually a very strong incentive, and I think it's one of the successes why Eurovision Song Contest has been going on for such a long time, because it has a sustainable financial source.
Do you always have a backup in mind in case it's all going to go terribly wrong?
We always have a plan B.
Plan B.
Yeah, we do. We have to. But I'm confident, I've said it before and I will say it again, I'm confident that we can take Eurovision Song Contest to any territory in Europe. I think we have proven it over so many years, and we will still be able to do it. Also in places where the financial situation is not so good, we can do it. We can do it leaner. We can do it smaller, but still have 3 high-end shows, and it doesn't need to be as big as Düsseldorf or Stockholm. It can change in the different territories. So I'm working a lot with the Portuguese broadcaster now to find a reasonable budget, and I do that every year to make sure that the public broadcaster is not diluting its own content by financing Eurovision Song Contest. So it has to be sustainable for the broadcaster, and that is also a discussion I start on day one.
Well, I'm sure you might want to ask a question of any of the speakers on the panel. Anybody got any questions? Comments? Yes.
Thank you. That was almost as entertaining as the song contest itself. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. And it's kind of a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, where my name's Jenny and I'm a Eurovision fan. But one of the things, the sort of thinking about my sort of interaction with the Eurovision Song Contest throughout the years and how it's changed, that you know, in recent times it's very much centred on Facebook. I have friends that we meet on Facebook once a year, and what we do is we love to, should I say quite politely, critique the songs, and that's why we love it. And that's something really interesting, and I often wonder whether we're unique, or whether it's a British thing, or whether it's much wider than that, and there's this sort of thing that it's something, Eurovision is something that you quite often love to hate, but still love it. But it's part of, that for me is part of what Eurovision is about. And I just wondered if anybody had a response to that, or thoughts on maybe you're
I think it's stronger in the UK than it is in other territories. Some countries takes it very, very serious. A country like Sweden, it's not about hating it or loving to hate it. It's pure love, and it's on a high level, and that goes for the whole Nordic region actually. So the Brits has their this special way of treating the song contest. But I see it's the enormous popularity it has in the UK, and the high ratings that the BBC has every year, and it's a lot of love here for sure. But it has this little twist to it. I don't know why, but that's Europe.
I was at a conference where someone had done research into the most scornful nations. Because as you say, Sweden, absolutely serious, Greece, absolutely serious. And the 2 most scornful nations are the UK and the Czech Republic. Why the Czech Republic?
I would just chip in and say that I was talking to, is it Nora Ryan from the BBC, digital?
Speak a bit louder.
Sorry. I was talking to Nora Ryan, who works for the BBC. I was at Media City last year, and I was asking her about the BBC's strategy for Facebook and Twitter, and the tone, particularly, whether it was making a mockery of it in some sense. Was it being tongue-in-cheek, or has it post-Wogan, for all those years of Wogan, turning it into a bit of a farce and making us look at it like it was all a big joke? Because we're, as a fan, it's like comedy, isn't it? Comedy is a very serious art, isn't it? And as a fan, I'm very serious about it. I want to be entertained by it, but I do get a bit prissy when people do take the proverbial out of it, because I don't think it's merited. I think there's things that we all enjoy, but I just think the legacy of Wogan was that it kind of turned into a big joke where the rest of Europe didn't see it as a joke. And his kind of commentary in the later years, I mean, if you listen back to the commentary in 2008, which was the last year he did it, when Russia won in Belgrade, he sounds like a xenophobic old man. And I said this in the media in the UK when I got back, because some of the things he was saying and the tone he was taking clearly showed that he had no, he wasn't in touch with music on the continent and with the artists that won, and he was the Robbie Williams in, Eastern Europe, and it just sounded very, so I think there's a legacy of tone there, which kind of Graham Norton started off and wasn't being as quite as witty about it, but it's kind of crept back in again. But it's good fun, and we want, like I said in my paper, we want to be entertained, and we want our commentators to entertain us and to, like you say, enjoy us having our spats on Facebook saying, that was really rubbish, that was really good.
Brian wants to
Just very quickly, you are not alone. Just to reassure you, because I use social media sparingly for work, but actually Eurovision is a moment when I connect with people that I don't connect with during the year. And on the week of Eurovision for semis and final, my Facebook and Twitter account is really extraordinary, because everyone knows that I'm interested in Eurovision, and likewise my friends are, and therefore we communicate with each other. So it's about community. It brings people together and old friends back together. So for me, it's very important. You're not alone. I like you.
I was going to echo your sentiments as well, and I wonder whether it's possible to pass this in terms of tastes and genre theory. I attend once a year Eurovision parties as an ethnomusicologist, together with musicologists, and it becomes a disciplinary affair because we actually take out our exam recital performance charts and judge everyone accordingly. Obviously, the ethnomusicologists are going to go for, yeah, the kitsch and camp are fantastic, but maybe the musicologists have a slightly different take on things. But I wonder, how much of genre differences or what we expect goes into all this vis-a-vis how we pretend to be in the know, or how we pretend to be inclusive, or how we pretend to be politically correct in our superior or less superior tastes, and how all this is wrapped up in a nice package of, it's all celebratory. It's like watching the World Cup. I don't really follow all these acts, but once a year it's kind of fun to have an occasion.
Well, Phil gave us 4 categories of rock, pop, country, dance, and referred to, is it Alf Björnberg?
Alf Björnberg.
Björnberg. Is it Björnberg? Is that Björn Björn? Like Björn?
Yes.
No, it's his surname. It's all in one, Björnberg.
Oh,
It's
right,
Alf
Björnberg, yes.
Björnberg.
Björnberg, yes. Okay.
He's at Gothenburg University.
Any more points? Or, yes?
Thank you so much for an utterly fascinating panel. I'm Irish, so I grew up with Eurovision in my blood, and very similar to a lot of people here. There's annual Eurovision parties, there's the scorecard, there's all of that kind of stuff. But one of the most interesting things that I've noticed, and what I really enjoyed in the last few years, was the inclusion of sign language interpreting, and I think it's a really interesting shift. It's a really, I think it's very reflective of the sort of ethos of inclusiveness and community that Eurovision tries to encourage. But I'm wondering, does that initiative is it from the state broadcasters, or is it something, or maybe that the Eurovision organisers themselves are trying to facilitate or support more, and it's something that maybe more countries might be able to adopt to try and include, deaf and hard of hearing audiences more?
Some of the broadcasters, they have done this for many years actually on their local channels. But what we did for the first time in Vienna was to do this in the international sign language and broadcast it to all the participating broadcasters. And that was the first time. We repeated that the year after, but it was difficult to do it from Kiev this year. So this is hopefully something we will do. And some of our member broadcasters are actually obliged to do this kind of sign language on their programs. And you're right when you say that this is part of the values or the inclusiveness that is public service broadcasting.
Well, our time is up. Thank you very much for listening to our speakers, and especially to the visit here of Jon Ole Sand from the Eurovision Song Contest. Thank you very much.
Thank you.